So, the ethical concept of negative utilitarianism holds great insight into what one should morally seek as opposed to classical utilitarianism. The term was first coined by Karl Popper in his book, The Open Societies and Its Enemies, where he focused on political philosophies and questions about how to minimize the damage done by the powerful. Popper's main principle, as explained by Pierce in his article about negative utilitarianism, is that we should act to minimize suffering rather than maximize pleasure, which basically means that people should reduce the amount of suffering as much as possible, and then secondly, maximize the total happiness. This concept is highly affiliated with Buddhism, as depicted in Contestabile's journal, titled Negative Utilitarianism and Buddhist Intuition. He concluded that the Buddhist Noble Truths explain the lack of suffering as a perfect existence, just like how negative utilitarianism explains that a perfect moral world would be people seeking to alleviate the most amount of suffering possible. Classical utilitarian philosophers like Harry Sidgwick, they sought for the moral symmetry of happiness and suffering because they believed that they were balanced, they coincided with each other. But Popper described the two as completely asymmetrical. As I researched, I saw that basically negative utilitarians believe against this concept completely, and that suffering definitely has a stronger need to be addressed than just the lack of pleasure. They basically believe that pain has a higher moral significance than pleasure. And the main concept that I saw for this was that pain yields a cry for help, while there is no equivalent for that on the pleasure side. And I also believe that those who are not suffering are in less need of goodwill. I think that that's pretty much common sense. Walker, in his book Mind, explains that classical utilitarianism offers a choice. There's alleviating a small amount of pain or providing a small amount of pleasure, while classical utilitarianism would always choose that the answer would be to give that pleasure because of the greatest possible good. They believe that there's the balance, that there are two sides of the same coin. In Is Unhappiness Morally More Important Than Happiness by Griffin, he completely says that that's not the case, that the absence of pain needs to be assured first and be prioritized over those who are well off. The greatest possible good, though the greatest possible good is achieved, you have to take into account that the least amount of suffering was not achieved. So there are still people suffering, even though the average was good. As I said before, that goes with the idea that the alleviation of pain carries more moral significance. It can sometimes cause suffering for a minority if you choose the greatest possible good. Negative utilitarianism would choose suffering for no one, as opposed to suffering for some, even if that means there's a greater average yield of happiness. I believe that this practice is a great way to treat people with more equality and empathy than utilitarianism, than classical utilitarianism, because I believe that classical utilitarianism just shows like it's just clear cut, everybody's one, and if there's a bigger number of happy people, then the people that are unhappy don't matter. While negative utilitarianism says that it does matter and that those people shouldn't have to suffer at all. No one should suffer. I mean, of course, all ethical concepts have their flaws, but I think that negative utilitarianism really should be something that everyone thinks about, just because you shouldn't just think, oh, well, most people are happy. You should think that, yes, that nobody should be suffering. Not that most people are happy, but that no one is suffering, no one is upset. So basically that's why I believe that it just has a greater moral significance. Pain in the end does have a greater moral significance than pleasure. Thank you for your time.